Hello, Lily. I am delighted to meet you and for you to be a guest on our podcast, Therapy Works. Do you want to start by introducing yourself?
I'm Lily and I live in London with my 11-year-old son at the moment. The challenge that I am facing started 3 years ago, actually, where everything got turned upside down when my husband was diagnosed with a terminal cancer. And I found the challenges have been changing constantly and they're emerging and evolving all the time. Particularly, it started with the diagnosis, which turned everything completely upside down and on its head and was horrific. And then you
Do
go
you want to
through,
pause
yeah.
there and unpack? Turned everything upside down and was horrific. What was that like? What happened?
Yeah, of course. So my husband Cole was very young. He was in his mid-40s. He was very fit and did triathlons and cycled up mountains and all amazing feats that are just exhausted. It's exhausting even thinking about it. Was a very fit, healthy person, and he'd started to feel not great. And he, in terms of, it seemed like it was just like an acid buildup, reflux, and it had been going on for quite some time. He was on a very common drug to help suppress that. But then over time, me probably being Australian said you shouldn't be on drugs to help your body do something it should be able to do naturally. And every time he tried to come off it, he would get very ill. And in between time, COVID hit, and all of that was put on the back burner until he ended up getting incredibly ill, couldn't get out of bed, was so ill, just couldn't keep anything down at all. And what we didn't realize at the time was that he was actually dying, really. And it was very hard to get treatment because it wasn't COVID. And in
How
the
awful.
end, yeah.
So go back to it was COVID and no one was treating anybody if it wasn't COVID.
Yeah. So I remember calling the NHS helpline and describing Cole's symptoms and put down to food poisoning or gastro, but I'd seen it was so much worse than that. It was so much worse. And finally, I don't know why you don't think of these things. We had private health insurance, and we've got to do something because he wasn't getting any better. In fact, he was getting worse. And we got an appointment finally with a consultant, and there was a load of tests that were done and scans and all sorts of cameras going all through his body. And he was still incredibly ill. And I remember going for the results, and there was a mention at one of the tests that I couldn't go to any of these things because it was COVID. So this poor man was going to these horrible, all on his own. And I was allowed to go to the consultant's results. And I remember him saying, do you remember I told you that was that really rare thing that's probably maybe one in 1 or 2 million chance that this could be? And he said, well, that's what it is. And I think at the time, I don't even think Colin and I realised that it was cancer.
You didn't say the word cancer.
No, and this is the thing that we found more and more. It's constantly referred to as the illness or the disease, but you don't, when you're in this shocked situation, you don't put two and two together. And it's something called a Zollinger-Ellison syndrome, it's rare, and it's a tumour. It starts off in the neuroendocrine system, and it can crop up anywhere. And by the time they got to Cole's, his entire pancreas had been replaced by a tumour, and it had leaked out into all 8 sectors of his liver. And the fact that he was functioning at all and still doing these incredible bike rides and things was, incredible, really. And I remember we left that. It was nearly nearly 3 years ago to the day, actually. And I remember we left that diagnosis and both of us were like, well, with odds like that, we need to buy a lottery ticket. But of course, we didn't even get one number on that lottery ticket. And everything tipped and tilted and just went in directions that you just find yourself in such a foreign situation because we'd never
Like
had
an
anything
alien
like
planet.
this. Completely, because you don't have a clue about any of this stuff. You don't know what life is going to look like. And then, of course, our son, Ethan, was 8 at the time. So having to manage that as well in terms of supporting him and helping him navigate and to understand, because there was no point, we were always very open with him, and we did it in a very age appropriate way because we knew the prognosis was not good, and we had to start preparing him along with us for what was going to happen. So yeah, has changed
It's a lot.
everything.
Yeah.
It's a lot. Yeah. It's a lot.
And so do you want to say, I mean, he had at that point must be stage 4 cancer and he was dying.
Yes. So this is the other thing, Julia, is that no one really tells you those things either unless you pointedly ask. So there was a lot of terminology around grading, and in Cole's case, his cancer was quite a slow growing cancer. But of course he had defied the odds there as well, and it was fast growing. We never referred to it as a terminal illness, and he was incredible in that he said all these statistics are based on averages and that's how they have to do it, and I understand that, but I'm not average. And we literally threw everything that we possibly could at it. And as terrifying as it is to be living with someone who has terminal illness who you love to absolute pieces, we tried as much as we could to have the most normal life that we could have. It got to the point where we were always going somewhere once COVID lifted. And Cole was incredible. He was so heroic. And I researched everything under the sun and looked at how cancer worked and just how we could battle it, not just from traditional treatments, which of course definitely have their place, but looked at all of the things that we could do from diet and exercise and functional medicine and all of those things. And it was a bit of a running joke because I'd be in bed at night and with the laptop and the pen and the sort of frantically writing notes and researching things and saying, oh, we need to look at this, we could do that, there's this clinical trial here. And Cole would be lying next to me reading a cycling magazine. Be like, all right, okay, we'll do it. And I guess that is how he managed things. But I think part of me doing that was about control, because I felt so helpless that he was going through this. And it was trying to help as much as I could and control things, I suppose, as much as I could.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you both always went for the hope. Like he was exceptional. He got an exceptional diagnosis.
He really was. And, yeah, he really was.
So you wanted to go for the exceptional in cure and hope and getting better or surviving longer. And I guess for you, looking and exploring, it also gave you a kind of a map to begin to understand the landscape you were on, because you didn't have the language, you didn't have the knowledge. So researching it supported you in that way. And that's often, for most of us, understanding what we're grappling with from a cognitive point of view is often the first way in, because we can't really manage our emotions. So we try to understand through thinking.
Exactly. And I think looking back, that's exactly what I was doing, because I think once the initial shock and things starts, and you can wallow around for ages. But for me, we've got a small child and Ethan's adopted and we've had him since he was 2. So there was other challenges that presented themselves and things that he couldn't understandably articulate and behaviours that were coming out. So it was trying as much as we could to research all of those things and be armed with as much knowledge as we could. But also part of it was us normalising death too, I think, and trying to make it as normal as living. And I know that sounds
I think it's
odd,
true.
But we had to, because we knew what we were faced with. I don't think we knew we were doing that at the time, but subconsciously that's what we're doing. And I think Cole had a fabulous way of explaining things really simply to Ethan, and so that it wasn't so terrifying, and explaining that it was a clump of cells that had gone crazy. And that's all cancer was. And we've all got cells and they've gone crazy. So we're doing everything we can to make sure those cells don't take over, and that this is why these treatments are happening. And I remember he used Adam Kay's anatomy book to show him where the cells had gone crazy and also what sorts of treatment would happen. And we christened Cole's cancer simply because nobody knows a horrible Dave, and we referred to it as Dave. And there was a lot of language that we took on and that our friends and family took on around Dave and killing Dave, and any conversations in other environments listening to that probably would have been quite terrifying for people to listen to the fact we're all
Killing
plotting
Dave.
to kill Dave. Yes. And there was, I think, an incident where Ethan and I were out for dinner together, and he was asking me, Cole was in the surgery, and he said, "Are we killing Dave?" And I said, "Yes, that's what we're trying to do." And he said, "When's that happening?" And I said, "Tomorrow morning." And he said, "Is it going to work?" I went, "Well, that's the plan." And we didn't know that there was a waiter behind us listening to this conversation. And they're things that we still laugh about and that Cole laughed about. And
Thank God for being able to laugh, right? Otherwise you really would be on the floor.
Well, exactly. And there's a lot of humour in the horrible situations that we found ourselves in. And I think that helped Cole and I a lot, because we would often be really giggling behind when something had happened, that conversations that you just don't think would ever come up that do. But there's a lot of humour in dark moments for sure, and that definitely got us through some horrible moments. But yeah.
So what was the quality of Cole's life before he died, because of all the treatment and surgery? And
so he was phenomenal, because we were told immediately that it would be pretty impossible to get to surgery to try and remove, they call it debulking, so they can't remove, it's basically debulking the cancer. And we tried chemotherapy first, which we didn't know whether there was a very slight chance that it would reduce the tumours enough. And so we, of course, are worried, because chemotherapy, and it was happening straight after Christmas, and it was launched straight in. And I think Cole was very hairy, and he was starting to lose his hair on the top of his head. And I said, "Well, okay, the decision's made now, because you're going to lose your hair." So, and I remember the oncologist said, "Oh no, with this sort, it's tablets and you don't." And I was like, "Oh, he's still going to have that." But he handled that incredibly well. And Cole continued to work full time. He continued to cycle. Wow. He was unbelievable. He was unbelievable. So from the outside, it looked like things were going really well. And he was able to make it to surgery. He, again, defied all the odds, got into a tiny percentage of the 10% that he needed to get into, and then went into surgery and had almost a mini organ harvest. He just had so much taken out of him and was in hospital for a long time. And of course, the recovery time on that was around Christmas again. But he again defied the odds, and within weeks was back to full sort of running order, which again was absolutely incredible. So we were able to do things as a family and travel and all those sorts of things that we could do. There's always that horrible burning thought that you're with all the time, that he's not well.
Is this the last time we'll do this together?
Yeah. And the illness ended very similarly to how it started, that it was a Saturday morning again, and he couldn't stop vomiting, and it went downhill extremely quickly. And 3 months before Christmas last year, he was in hospital, and not I think we just thought we could get through everything. It's that hope that you said. So we thought, okay, this is just another challenge that we'll hurdle. And one day the consultant came in to the room, and and he was fantastic, but there was no preparation at all. He just said, well, we've exhausted every option. There's nothing more that we can do. And it's
like a punch.
It was. And we weren't expecting it. So it was such a
shock,
blow and a shock and all those things. And I remember leaving Cole's room. He'd been very ill at this stage. There were other complications where he had a build-up of ammonia that was poisoning his system. And
sounds horrible.
Horrible. And I remember leaving the room to speak to the oncologist. And I said, we've got to start preparing for, I suppose, now the inevitable, and getting Ethan prepared too, and said, what Cole won't want to know, but I need to know, in your experience, what sort of time frame. And he said, I think we're looking at weeks. And again, I was absolute. Then I remember walking back into the room to Cole, knowing he wouldn't want to know, and that's sitting in me. And it's, again, you can't believe it, because that everything accelerates, like you just said. Is this the last, or really simple things? Is this the last time he'll see rain? Is this the last? It's just, it can become all consuming.
And you knew he didn't want to know that he was, because you talked about it. He'd said to you explicitly, I don't want to know.
So that was the thing with Cole and I. We just knew each other so well that I knew he'd never asked the whole journey that we'd been on. He never ever talked time frames. It was just that path, actually, that you said. It was plotting a path. What are the things that we need to do? Then what do we do if that doesn't work? And that's how he managed it.
Held it together.
Yeah, he really did. And of course, I said to the oncologist, if he wants to know, then definitely tell him, but he won't want to know. So please don't offer it up, or please brief everyone not to offer it up, because he won't want to know. And he didn't ever ask.
So you two never talked about him being dead and like having a funeral, or saying goodbye to each other finally, or you had no conversations about that at all?
No, and it sounds absurd as I'm saying it, but
it's very common.
Didn't do it because we didn't feel like we needed to have grand conversations, because our relationship was always, we told each other how we felt, and I think we were a real team. And I remember Cole saying to one of the hospice doctors, it's fine, because Lil will make every single decision that would be 100% aligned with mine. So but it's because we were so open about everything. I find it weird that we didn't talk about the death and the dying and those sorts of things. And I think because we had tried as much as we could to normalize it, so that part of that was me making sure, which I couldn't, of course, just trying to make it feel less scary for him too, because I wasn't in that situation. I can't imagine what that would be like to have been knowing that you were then off to the hospice, and what that actually signifies.
Right.
Yeah.
But what I understand about your relationship was that there was such a deep level of love and the trust that went with that love, that in some ways it bypassed the speaking. And I can see that Cole is in you now. Like he's speaking to you now. It's almost like he's listening to you, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think that's true. We were together for about 22 years, and we were married nearly 20 or so. And we just had such a relationship that was he was my best friend and I was his, but we were also quite independent of each other as well. So it was very much a partnership in the true sort of sense of the word, I think. And which we were incredibly lucky. I was so lucky to have that for so long, even with him in passing. So I think a lot of what we did towards the end was trying as much as possible to honour him and what he was like in life and what he would want, and to make it as dignified as possible, because he was such a dignified person, if that makes sense. So I wanted him to die the same way he lived.
With dignity and humour and love.
Exactly. So...
Gosh, and so it's almost a year since he died. How is your son?
It has been, I think, once you get that diagnosis, the grieving starts. And in terms of Ethan, the grieving and his behaviour particularly changed, as it would, perfectly understandably. He is such a resilient, incredible kid, and he has been phenomenal. He's now 11. He's nearly 12. That's a very important point in that age, that he's nearly 12. And there's no doubt that both of us have struggled, and we've both receiving therapy and help. He talks about Cole quite a lot, and the way that he does that, both of us will talk about him, which is much more about humour-related things. So something will happen and Ethan will say, "Oh, Dad would have hated that." And he'd be right. And it's things like that. And he'll suddenly remember things that he and Cole would have done together, because they did a lot together, because they were exhausting. They were always doing something. And he has managed it in such an incredible, mature way. And I remember he said to me, I was so lucky to have Dad for those few years that I had him. And I remember thinking, that is phenomenal. And at the same time, I said to him, but it's okay to also feel like that's not fair and that you should have had longer. And he said, yeah, I do feel like that, but I mainly feel lucky. And it's presenting challenges that I would never have even thought about. I think the main one has been that he no longer has Cole, and that I am now a single parent. And I know it probably also sounds silly, but in all of this, I hadn't really calculated that would be something that would happen. And that has been a huge shock to the system, along with the grief. But for Ethan I'm very conscious that we have a very tiny little family in terms of but our broader family and our friends who are like family, we're both very lucky and supported. But I'm very conscious that when the doors close at the end of the night, it's just him and I, and making him feel secure, and that the worry, I know there's worry there with him that something will happen to me, and then what happens to him. And that's been really challenging, and it is for him as well, because it's just him and I. So,
I mean, my mind is going in two directions. One is, it's astonishing he's so resilient, given that he is adopted, and so that there's a loss of his biological parents, and that could have meant that he was vulnerable to another loss, that then a new loss would ignite the previous loss. And it doesn't sound like that is what happened. It sounds like he could both be sad and love and be grateful.
Yes, it's been, and I think you're spot on, because I've been so conscious of worrying that those significant losses that he's already had in such a young life, that this would really, it's a huge blow again. And it hasn't been easy for him, for sure. He had to settle into secondary school, and he's struggled. It's taken quite a while to settle. It's a huge change for him too. But I have been really surprised by when it seems like he's not, that there is such an even keel with him in many ways, and that he feels okay to talk about things And he will tell me when he's not feeling great. And if something has happened, usually something might happen that he's at school, and we'll talk about it, and he'll say it could be something happened the other day. And he said, Mum, I know that I shouldn't have done that. He said, I am struggling. I'm really thinking about Dad a lot, and I'm getting angry, and it's coming out in all those sorts of ways. And I know that's not helpful for teachers. I just think, again, wise beyond your years.
Exactly.
But I think that's the thing, as we come up to the 1 year anniversary, that it will be very hard.
I was thinking about, of course, being adopted. I imagine it was a loss for you, unless it was a choice not to have your own biological children, so that you're carrying a previous loss.
So I had several miscarriages, actually. And so we made the decision after quite a while after that we would adopt. And that was a whole process in itself as well. And also managing people's reactions around different things too, and then understanding the sort of what comes with adoption that you don't necessarily. I think you sometimes go into things a bit naively and think, well, you know what, everyone's different, we'll be all right. And there's definitely been a lot of challenges, and you're right, there was loss around not being able to carry full term and all those sorts of things as well. So there's been, and Carl and I got through those things together as well. So not that is the same as what
there's not an equivalence. There isn't a hierarchy, is there?
Not at all. But we knew what we were made of in those periods, because they were really, really challenging.
Yeah, really,
and horrible.
Really hard and painful, and with all of the emotion that comes with them of anger and hurt and upset and loss, enormous amount of loss and sadness. I've heard always one of the hardest challenges of your partner dying is parenting alone, is being a single parent. And it wasn't the deal, right? You married for sickness and health, but actually just the health, not really the sickness, frankly, certainly not the death.
Right. And it is, we always joked with Ethan's very spirited, and we always joked that he was absolutely a 2-person policy. And we were like, he's a 2-person policy. And even when Cole was so ill in the hospice, I'm like, you're not going anywhere. That kid is 2-person policy, remember? And it has been, actually, no, I hadn't thought about it at all, because we were so in the moment of making everything as much as we possibly could okay of what we were going through day by day. It was so intense for 3 months. And then now being spat out at the other end and finding that I'm on my own and we are very lucky in that we've got lovely friends and family who really do support, and it's warts and all, and they were absolutely have been there for us the whole way through Cole's illness. But again, it's completely different when it's just you, and knowing if you're making the right decisions, or if there's things that you're saying, particularly when you're grieving as well, that you think, oh, is that going to do more harm than good? Are you trying to protect me as well? And I think there was a bit of an element with Ethan trying to protect my feelings as well, and wanting me to be okay. So trying very hard to be strong himself when he's obviously he's crushed. Yeah.
And it does feel like there's a term for small families. I don't know if this is annoying or not, but they're called Beanpole Families. It's like you're
quite like that.
Like, you just got this, and that you can be knocked over so easily, because it feels like you wanted more of you to have the weight, to carry the weight with others. And you've got this family that is made from friends and family, which obviously is life-changing. And yet there is something about shutting the door.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, you're his only person and he's your only person. And that is scary, being so little, like being a small family,
It
small
is.
family.
And I'm also very little. So it is.
Are you? You're tiny.
In stature, I'm very little. Ethan's taller than me now. And it's quite scary. I think because I keep thinking about how I would feel as a kid at his age. And I can remember lying in bed being terrified that something would happen to mum or dad. And I'm one of 4 children, so it was robust and noisy. And I think often I'd think, I wish I was an only child. And it was, but for me, I think it's really wanting him to feel absolutely secure that I'm not his only anchor to the whole world. And as much as you're right, there's so many people around us who are brilliant and are always there. Once at the end of the day, it is just he and I. And
have you talked to him about what would happen if, I want to talk about the dog. Have you talked to him about what would happen if you died? Who would look after him? Because that would be an important conversation to have.
We have. We have. And we've got very best friends that live literally around the corner. And we've known for a long time, and they've been in his life since we became a family. And their kids and our kids and Ethan we've kind of interchanged. Exactly. They really are like siblings. And nice. He knows that's what would happen. And for him, it's like an extension of our family.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's a big thing that you told him. Often parents don't, but that sounds really helpful because you answer his worry, which he could silently just be haunting him. So that's really important, being pragmatic. Like, if I get run over tomorrow, you will be looked after by the family he's known all his life, who are like family around the corner.
Exactly. And I think kids particularly need that reassurance and just being told, I'll be fine. When you're a terrified kid, it's not. And as I said, we just don't know what's going to happen. And I said, as much as I don't intend on going anywhere, we do need to, unfortunately, think about this stuff. And when he's asked me, I've been honest about it.
Yeah, good for you. Yeah. Because also both of your experiences that terrible things can happen out of the blue for no good reason. So it's not like that's part of his belief system, isn't it? That life isn't predictable and people don't always die in the right order and life is unknown, what can happen. So tell me about your dog, how he is a significant member of your family and has consoled you both.
He is. He's a black Labrador, and he's nearly 14 actually. And
oh Lord.
Yes. So I knew the whole time Cole was ill from diagnosis every night. I would pick Ned's ear up and just whisper, "Don't you dare pack it in. Don't you dare.
Don't you dare die.
Don't you dare." And because he and Cole, they were together all the time. Their silhouettes that's what's always in my mind, is they're always together. And there was always like a full poo bag swinging from Cole's finger because they were always together. Obviously not in the poo bag, not in the house, but they were so close. And Ned, bizarrely, well, not bizarrely, because they were so close, he went through a horrible time of sorrow as well. And this time last year, Ned had lost a horrible amount of weight and was really depressed. And I had taken him to the vet. In fact, we were there again today for his annual checkup. He's doing much better. And she said, something happening. And I said, yeah, this is what's happening. And he was already grieving. And it was it was terrible because it was another a member of the family really who was very important and has been here. But I think what is lovely that's happened is that Ethan and Ned are a lot closer than they were, because Ned was always with Cole. So if Cole was here, he'd be at Cole's feet, or they'd be going out for a walk, and Cole was top dog to Ned. So but that's really changed, and Ned will come up and sleep on the bed with me now, and he will always be, if Ethan's home, he's really excited and they'll be curled up on the couch together. And he's been a really healing presence, I think, for both of us, actually. And now he's doing so much better that outlive us all, I think. It's been a really important part of our healing, I think, with Nick as well.
I think it's very underestimated how significant dogs are in families, or pets, any pets really in families. So my last question is, what have you, I mean, it sounds like what's helped you has been your kind of attitude and friends and family and the trust and fundamentally the trust and deep love that you have with Cole. That's the thing that sustained you both, and it meant you went more towards hope, although you suffered a lot and you grieved and are grieving deeply, and that Cole is in you. But looking back on it now, what have you learned in the last 3 years?
That is such a good question. And I think we've learned so many things. And I think it's incredible to learn how brave you can be when you honestly think things are completely insurmountable, but actually you can get through things. Also, the importance of normalizing death and talking about it and being as open as we can be with everybody about it, and
that death is as normal as birth.
Yeah, it is. And allowing people to feel like they can talk about it and that they won't accidentally upset you. And so
or make it happen.
Yeah, actually, yes. Yes, you also learn how superstitious you become. But also the other thing that I have really thought about is we talk about the fact that it takes a village to raise a child. And what I've really learned is that it really takes a village to help someone die. It really does. Yeah. And without that, it would have been so much more difficult than it already was. And it cushions the blow in many ways, but it also makes that person, and this time it was Cole, I hope, past wherever they're going, knowing how important and loved they are. So
yeah. So the village, your closest friends, family members, really showed up and told him how much they loved him, and told him
so much. Yeah.
How important he was. So he really felt loved before he died. He felt known and loved as he was, and that he would be remembered.
That's exactly right. And people's bravery in what must have been really difficult for them as well, because everyone has different relationships. There was friendships, and there's all the grieving that goes with that as well. And Cole and everyone turning up for him, whether it was, because there was a time in the hospice where we just kept getting told he had sort of 24 hours to live, but he just kept going. And then he became better. He started to be able to interact, but he was so much better in that he was himself again in many ways, even though days were numbered. And people friends who are like family were turning up at the hospice, and anything sort of Cole wanted, he had these people were baking lasagnas and doing all the sorts of things that he wanted, and we would laugh because he was almost like the hospice fraud, because he started to get better, and we'd turn up and he's loved music, and there'd be music coming from his room, and we'd go in and we'd be like, they're going to catch on soon and you're going to get booted out. But people turned up and people were there, not just once, people would consistently, there was a whole rota of people constantly being there for him and trying to make it as normal as possible. So going to watch a show with him, or I think it was rugby or something was on at the time, and doing the normal things that they would normally do around that to make it as normal as possible, and spending one-on-one proper time with him as well. And it was that's what definitely made a difference. And I haven't got a doubt in my mind that he didn't leave knowing that he was loved.
Yeah, and that consoles you now.
For sure, absolutely it does. But yeah, it does, because it wasn't anything to think back, I wish we had have done that differently, or I never got to say that, or because none of those, there was that
no
didn't
regrets.
happen. No.
Yeah. I can see how much you miss him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So painful, the missing him physically.
Yeah. And the things that you forget, even now I still go, oh, Cole would find that really funny. I must tell him. And then you stop and go, and I do tell him. But it's
Yeah. So coming
cute.
to the anniversary, how are you going to think about that or mark the anniversary of his death?
So Cole was a fantastic cook. And I think that was one of the funny things that Ethan had said to me. He's like, Mum, how are we going to eat now? Because I was like, right, well, I'll be learning. So there's certain dishes that were Cole's. So we're going to have our friends over for dinner and cook one of those dishes. And he was so into music. And one of our friends who's a DJ has made this most beautiful playlist of all Cole's favourite tracks. And so people get to still hear him eat his food. And that's what we're going to do to mark it and do something and be together. And
yeah,
it will be hard for sure.
It will.
But it needs to be commemorated.
Yeah. So do you have a last word for people listening? Maybe people whose partners have died or people whose partners are dying, that they know they're going to die. Is there a final word that you would like to say?
Is, I think, right, and you'll be, if someone is dying, is that you'll be amazed what you can do. You'll be amazed. You'll look back and be amazed at what you can do. And as painful as it might be to try and talk about death and we talk about people giving birth, we talk about babies, we talk about all those things. Painful as it can be, I think if you can talk about death as openly as we talk about all other parts of life, it will, in my own experience, it may not be the same for everyone, but it makes things so much easier. And it also gives people sort of silent permission for themselves too, that they can ask you how you are, that they're also allowed to be upset because everyone has different relationships with that person. And it's just all about, as you said, love. And that's what it boils down to. And for me, normalizing things as much as we could was another expression of that love. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lovely way to end. Thank you so much, Lily.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Trying to do our diaries is tricky, so we can't always be a 3. So we're a 2, which is very nice, although we'll miss Soph. And we're going to talk about Lily Pickard and her kind of extraordinary, both suffering and extraordinary resilience. And I learned so much from her. I wondered what you're thinking.
Yes, I think I learned a lot from her as well. And just before I start reflecting on Lily, actually, as you were talking and saying today we're a 2 and not a 3, I was thinking how when we're a 3, I feel like we're a triangle and I've got a sort of extra support. And suddenly I was like, oh my gosh, I feel a little bit nervous just doing this, me and you. And now it feels like we're a line, not a triangle. And it made me really think about, obviously it's a tiny thing, but how when your family goes from being a triangle where you have these 2 supporters.
Sturdy.
Yeah, like there's something so much more solid about it. To Lily's experience now, where her family feels so much more fragile, even though she has a huge amount of strength and a support network. And anyway, so that was just a passing thought I had while you were talking.
I think that's a really beautiful and insightful one. And there's a term for it, which is Beanpole Families. So that families which are 2 people. And Beanpole, you can be resilient and sway in the wind, but you're narrow.
Yeah, absolutely.
And with all the support, and there's so much we can say about that, because she was talking about we need support for dying as well as living, and a village to have a good death, which is what actually happened in medieval times. But I was thinking still, at the end of the day, she closes the door and it's her and Ethan.
Yeah.
And that is and she calls it in the most affectionate, loving way, a small family. But I always want to try and generalize. So,
well, I think being a single parent is incredibly challenging, regardless of the reasons for being a single parent, whether it's because of a bereavement or because the other parent is not involved for whatever reason. I think that as a society, we're quite rubbish at recognizing the enormous pressures and challenges of being a single parent, which are partly practical, like how do you get to every appointment, everything that your child needs, and also emotional, like how do you carry the burden of your children on your own. And when you have one child, it's a challenge because it feels fragile. But when you have more than one child, there's the challenge of that there's only one of you and your children want all of you. And yet there's only one of you. And there is the charity we've talked about before called Gingerbread, which does a lot of advocacy for single parents and also has an online community of advice and support. And it's a really great resource. But I think as a society, we're not good at supporting single parents.
I'm completely right. And I think how we've often talked on this podcast, either physical and the mental are so interrelated and is such a kind of extra burden, because it is the physical of doing your job, getting the child to school, all the practical things, but also it's not having someone to go with or try something out with or lean on or just do nothing with and just say, let's think about this together. Even though when you have friends to do that, someone who's as invested in you, whose child it is as well, makes an enormous difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And to share the joy and the fun bits with too. Like it's
Of course,
much more fun to do. Like sometimes I get like my son is 4 and he really loves swimming and he does these swimming lessons once a week. I get these videos of him swimming and no one in the whole world is going to find those videos of him splashing around in the swimming pool as adorable than except for my partner. And so I think the loss that Lily is facing is not just the loss of Cole, who was obviously her deep soulmate and love, but she also was suffering the loss of her family unit and facing the sort of loss of being a family in the same way as they were. So there's so many levels of loss. And yet alongside that, it was such a beautiful example of the deep level of love that helped her survive so many challenges. There was a real sort of sense of togetherness in it that was really incredible to hear, like the sort of intrinsic level of their love.
The intrinsic trust. And I think the sort of the bigger point was we've done quite a few episodes now with a partner dying, and we had the Annabelle Croft one, which is very powerful. And I think it's so interesting to hear two different stories, but also stories that sort of align, and how, there's often one size fits all approach to cancer when people who are given a diagnosis, what they need and what support they need and how much information they want is very unique and individual. And
I think it's an interesting contrast to make because I think their experience of the actual death was incredibly different. And it was as a result, I think, of feeling like this is what this person would want. This is how he would want. Like, of course, no one wants to die. Given the situation, this is how he would have wanted to be. And I think Lily was able to create an environment that was as much as what Cole would have wanted. And I thought that it was so interesting because I guess the general advice around death is you should discuss the funeral and discuss what you want, what that person would want. And yet it also shows there isn't a one size fits all.
No.
But actually for them, that wasn't the right thing. And so I think what was very helpful for people who might be listening is that, of course, it's helpful to get advice about what is generally thought of as best practice and trust your own instinct. Like if you know that actually this isn't right for this person, whatever anybody else says, then go with your own instinct. I think you're less likely to regret it.
I completely agree. And actually, when I'm working with families, that's my top line. When they want advice about what to say to children about death or how to talk about the dying with your partner or as a family, or my top line is, I'm going to give you what I understand and what my experience has taught me and what sort of is thought of as best practice and research. But the most important thing is that you know your family and yourselves. So if this fits within who you are and what you believe, then use it, but throw out anything that doesn't feel right.
The other thing that I thought was really lovely and generally hugely underestimated was their fabulous dog, Ned. I think we underestimate how much dogs are part of the family.
Proper family member.
Proper family member. And I think there's a lot of research on your polyvagal system and how pets can really soothe your nervous system actually as well. So it's not just the sort of comfort they're given in like being there. They're actually doing something to your body that calms your body down. I do feel a bit anxious about Ned's age. Ned.
I know. Ned. But also how Ned grieved. So yes. There's research that shows that dogs are the closest animals to human feelings and that they really do empathise with us. And he was grieving Cole, wasn't he? And that was so sad.
So sad. Incredibly sad. Yes, and there's something about dogs and pets, not for everybody, but for lots of people, that there's the sort of unconditionality of a dog's love and being able to meet a dog's need. Parenting is very hard. I think you feel quite helpless a lot of the time and you're doing your best, but quite often you feel like you're getting it wrong or you worry that you're getting it wrong. And dogs are lovely like that because a lot of the time you can give them what they need and they will give you love. and it's quite simple. I'm sure there's lots of complicated dogs out there, but I think for the large majority of people who have dogs and are happy with them, there's something about the simplicity of it that is very comforting.
And we share Bob, don't we? We share a dog. So you have Bob,
we have a dog share. Bob has a blended family. And my children adore Bob. They love him so much. I wouldn't say it's fully reciprocated by Bob, but they really love him.
And I find him just unbelievably calming and restorative, and just the way he just is so consistently pleased to see me. I don't think anybody is as pleased to see me. and so affectionate. And I think that is physiologically and as a family, it's so uncomplicated and life is so complicated. So I find that very a lovely thing. Soothing.
Yeah, it's very soothing. Yeah. And I think my other sort of thoughts while I was listening to Lily was around her friends and her community and how supportive they've been. And I was thinking about lots and lots of people out there who may have a friend who's in a similar situation, either a bereavement or just, friends just having a really difficult time as single parents.
Yeah.
And I think you, Mum, in GriefWorks, you give really fantastic advice of how to be a really good friend in those situations. And I think what some people tend to do is like, I'll be there, let me know if I can help, and very well-intentioned, well-meaning. But actually what people really need is quite practical, specific help, like offer a menu of options of how to help. Like, can I pick your child up from school on X dates? Shall I do the shop this week? And when I do the shop, giving them a sort of, in Bath, we have this cook, which is a sort of really delicious, fresh food that's frozen. Like, can you give them a sort of cook subscription so that they get a delivery of food however times a month? And I think the other incredibly important thing is being there in the long term, because I think in the aftermath, there's lots of people around, there's quite a lot of drama, it's quite busy. And actually what you really need is a friend who's going to stick it out, because that sort of noise dies away. And I think we've talked before about actually a year on, it's almost harder because it's facing a new reality. And that's when you really need the people around you to be there for you.
Yeah, I think that's completely right.
All taken from GriefWorks.
Thanks, Daniel. The last thing I'd say was that actually you would maybe add to is, Ethan, about the grief is developmental. You're not do it once and done. And so for families with young children or older, every new developmental stage or milestone or event or losing a football match or whatever it is can reignite your grief, and it can feel like yesterday. But that doesn't mean that your child isn't grieving or hasn't done the right thing. It's just, it is an adaptive, ongoing developmental process. So be aware of that and allow it, and find ways together that you can build a supportive system that allows your child to both jump in the puddle and be very sad, and jump out of the puddle and be a happy, normal, resilient kid.
Yes, I think that's definitely true. And also the death of somebody means something different at different ages. So if your child has a parent die when they're 3 or 4, they're going to have a very different cognitive understanding of that than when they're 7, 8, 9, and then again when they're 13, 14, 15. And so in a way, their grief is also going to follow a trajectory of their understanding. And I'm using ages, but really developmental stages. If you have a child who's maybe a later developer, that will affect their cognitive understanding. And that can be helpful to know too, realizing that actually at 3, 4, children don't understand the permanency of death, and that changes. And therefore, the meaning of their parent dying is really different. And then the awareness of actually not everybody has a parent that died. And I think another hard thing, intrinsic of what you're saying, is that grief does look different in children. And a lot of the time, they are going on about their day and going on play dates and maybe seeming okay. And I think as parents, it can feel slightly like schizophrenic that they're suddenly desperately sad, but actually to know that's really typical, and to allow them to feel happy and to allow them to feel sad. There's not a right or wrong way of being after somebody dies for the child or the adult.
Yeah, that's beautifully put.
And CB UK, good website for all of that information. Child Bereavement UK.
Yeah, Child Bereavement UK has got incredible resources and support that you can get support for your families.
The only other thing that I would add if you have a child is that your child's school is also a really great resource. They can provide, often, not always, but I think it's definitely worth working with the school. And if a parent has died, thinking with the teacher about how you would want the other children to be told and for your child to know. All of those things actually can be quite important.
The last thing I was going to say as a kind of bigger point that I saw so lived in Lily is humour, like being able to laugh at the dark and take the piss when things are really bad. And along with humour, gratitude for what there is, and to somehow step out of it as well. And I felt she showed that so beautifully, and I've seen that with hundreds of people, is that when you can face it and feel it and do the work, but you can also step out of it and take the piss and have a laugh, that really does help. So I'm so grateful to Lily for being so open and honest with us, and I hope you're listening, get something from it, and thank you for listening. We're so appreciative of your relationship with the podcast. Do share this episode if you think someone would find it helpful, and do also rate and subscribe. We have a Substack newsletter we'd love you to get every week, so do sign on for that. And until next week, thank you.